just a relaxing car to drive, you know. Welcome to the episode of Jay Leno's Garage. The car today, 1932 Packard Twin-Six. This car is special to me because it's the first classic car I ever bought. I bought it back in the mid-'80s. And probably more important than the car itself is the man I bought it from. I bought it from Phil Hill, America's first world champion, F1 world champion. Phil was more than a world champion. Phil was also a brilliant mechanic. He'd been a Packard mechanic for years. He raced for Jaguar. He was a photographer. He knew opera. He loved music. And he was a guy that had real mechanical sympathy for vehicles. I don't think Phil ever broke a car during a race. I think just about every car he raced, he finished with. You know, a lot of guys would get overly aggressive and, you know, slam gearboxes and shift without the clutch, and, you know, cars would blow up. Phil's one of those guys, he could just feel what it was doing all the time. And I learned a lot from him. In fact, he taught me one of the most valuable things about any sort of antique car. Before you put it in reverse, touch second. Because a lot of times you go, you know, trying to get it and put it in second, and it'll go right into reverse because they're on the same, the way the transmissions are built. That's first and reverse are sort of close to each other. And when you're in second, it'll automatically, and it's worked for every car ever since. So I was always very grateful for that. We lost Phil Hill just about 10 years ago. We had his 80th birthday party here at the garage, and it was fantastic. Dan Gurney and all the greats showed up to pay tribute to Phil. He was ill at that time, but not so ill he couldn't enjoy himself. So it was really a great time. So this is one of those cars that has special meaning to me because I haven't really done anything to this car in 30 years other than change the oil and drive it. He did such a fantastic job restoring it. He had a restoration shop called Hill and Vaughn where he had turned out beautiful Pebble Beach level cars. In fact, he won Pebble Beach a number of times. He was just an interesting character. You know, I would sit with Phil and talk to him, and I said, "You ever get scared in a car?" You know, it wasn't when he was going 200 miles an hour in a Ferrari or at Le Mans or, you know, any of those places. He said it was always when somebody would bring a car over to show him and they would try to show off and show Phil how good a driver they were. He said that's what scared him more than the guys would, "Take a look at this, Phil," you know, and they just didn't know what they were doing, and he'd be clutching the dashboard. It just sort of made me laugh. You know, they're out there on the track going 180, but you're more scared of the idiot that's just got a Corvette and he wants to show off. So he was just a wonderful, wonderful man. And as you can see, this restoration has held up exceedingly well. All I do with this car is drive it. And for a while, it wasn't my daily driver, but it was close. I just used it a lot. You know, see, I've got the windshield open here. That was sort of your air conditioning in 1932. The car is a V12. It's 445.5 cubic inches, so 446. Big engine, bigger than a Duesenberg, but quieter. You know, Packard had the build quality. Nobody had the build quality that Packard did. These are quiet, they're smooth. Duesenbergs were loud and raucous, and, you know, the Hollywood crowd liked the Duesenbergs because they were fast. They had minimum 265 horsepower, as much as 320 horsepower. These were 160, but these had a sort of, I don't know, just a class and a grace. These were the cars of kings and presidents, and Packards were really the luxury mark for a long, long time in America, especially in the 20s and the 1930s. That was sort of their heyday. The name Twin-Six means twin six, two six-cylinder engines. And it harkens back to 1912 when Packard was the first auto manufacturer to make a V12 engine. In fact, Enzo Ferrari was so enamored of the Packard V12, the original one in 1912, that he based his Ferrari engines on it. He said, "I want an engine like the Packard V12." And of course they were different, but that was the first V12. So almost it's fair to say that probably every V12 since then was based on that. Certainly the Liberty engines and all those airplane engines of World War I. Don't forget, this was 1912. 10 years earlier, most cars had one cylinder, then two-cylinder cars, then four cylinders came out, then six cylinders. And then when the Twin-Six came along, there was nothing better. And it sold tremendously well. It finally finished about, I think 1920, maybe 1921, maybe 1922. Then Packard went to a straight 8. In 1932, they thought they would bring back the name Twin-Six because there'd be a lot of people who remember the original Twin-Six name. But by that time, it was the middle of the Depression, 1932, and people just didn't have the money or didn't care. You know, Cadillac had the V16, Marmon had the V16, a lot of companies had V12s. So this is the only year they called it the Twin-Six. It then went back to just the Packard V12 after 1932. They had cast iron heads, and they went to aluminum for a while. And then I think they went back to cast iron. It's a 3-speed manual transmission. It has a thing called a vacuum clutch where you're going down the road, you push that up, and when you let off, the clutch disengages, and you could shift without using the foot clutch. That was considered a sort of labor-saving device, a great thing at the time. And it also had freewheeling, which means the engine disconnected from the drivetrain and you could roll along, which was fine, but brakes are not what they were or what they are today, and eventually that became sort of dangerous, and freewheeling disappeared right after that. It also had something called ride control, which nobody else had. You pulled a knob, and you know, your shocks have fluid in them. Depending on how much fluid is in them is how hard or soft the ride's going to be. And when you adjusted it, it would like close up the holes, so the fluid, the car would firm up, and then when you turned it the other way, the holes would be bigger and the car could float through the bumps. And it was actually quite effective. It works pretty well. This is a car that was guaranteed to go 100 miles an hour, which doesn't seem like much today. But back then, most cars couldn't go 60 miles an hour. In fact, the term a mile a minute was pretty popular because there weren't many cars that could go a mile in a minute, certainly not for an hour at a time. But this is one of the ones that could. It's got a rumble seat in the back. It's got all the options of the period. Vents open here, you can open the windshield. You got the cowl here, and of course the big cormorant on the front up here. I mean, I just love the design of this. You know, a lot of times you see replica cars and they always look a little bit off, you know. The proportion from here to here to here is the same from here to here to here, is the same from here to here. This is your thermostat. What happens here is, as the car heats up, the hot water pushes it open, and the vents open and allow cool air in to cool the car. And as the car cools, the vents close again to try and keep the temperature fairly constant. Something else is kind of cool. These bumpers are filled with liquid at each end here, and that would help take out some of the torsional vibration. The liquid would move up and down. It would cancel out the vibration as the car went down the road. What else can we tell you about it? The rear window also goes down. Full complement of gauges. You'll see that in a minute when we go for a ride. But you know, this is an expensive car. As I said, the first collector car I bought, and I wanted to buy it from somebody I really trusted. And that's why I went down to see Phil. And I bought a couple of cars from him. And truly an honest, truly one of the most decent people you ever want to meet. You know, John Lamb was Phil's photographer of choice. He would take all the pictures of Phil for Road and Track and all the magazines. In fact, he's got a terrific book out called Driving Life. There's Phil right there. There's the book. You might remember Phil also drove the Ford GTs. I mean, it's an amazing life. And the most quiet, unassuming guy you could ever imagine. There he is with the GT40s. And Phil drove at a time when you didn't get rich doing F1. You just got kind of a firm handshake and maybe a nice slice of turkey and thank you very much, and that's all you got. You know, maybe you got free oil from one of the oil companies or free tires or something like that. It was, I think, one of the greatest periods. There's Phil with his Packard. I think he won Pebble Beach with that one. It's a good book. If you get a chance, if you see this in a bookstore, pick it up because it's really terrific. It just kind of tells his whole story. Let's take a look at the engine. Now, you gotta remember, this engine isn't as clean as a lot of the engines of my other cars because I use this one a lot. But as you can see, it's a massive beast. There's not many of these V12s left. They're just a great, great motor. In fact, let's take a look at the other side with the carburetor. Well, the carburetor's right here, but this was their first downdraft carbureted engine. You know, you've heard of updraft and downdraft. Well, updraft carburetor, the carburetor is on the side, because in the old days, the gas would come into the float bowl, and the needles weren't good enough to hold the pressure. So if you had an updraft carburetor, you see, gas would leak down just from gravity and get into the cylinders, and you could blow the cylinders apart if it filled with gasoline when it sparked. So a downdraft carburetor, the gas would come in, and any loose gas or gas would just harmlessly fall into the ground, you know. As they got better at sealing up, they went to the downdraft carburetor. You know, the needles in the float bowl could hold the fuel pressure back. Let me show the other side too. There you go. Nice clean. There's your oil fill right here. There's your dipstick down there. Fan, generator. Pretty straightforward, but just impeccably put together. Just an amazingly well-made automobile. They're really something. I really haven't done anything to this for 30 years other than just drive it and maintain it. And I probably should have cleaned it up a little bit more before we did this, but I wanted to show it as it's actually being used. Let me show you the rumble seat too. That's kind of fun. You do that through the little hatchway here. And that opens like that. You got a full seat, and look, you even have armrests that come out with magnets in it so you don't scratch the paint. And on this side, there's a step plate where you'd step to get into the back of the car. So that's kind of cool. Then when you're done, you just close these. And we're ready to go for a ride. The first thing you notice when you get in this car is the beautiful wood all throughout the vehicle. And you got your ashtray kind of molded right in there. Over here, you got your starter button, and you have two doors, one on each side, two glove compartments. You've got vents down there that you can let air in, and your brake is on this side. You have your ride control knob here. You pull that out or push it in, depending on how hard or soft you want the ride to be. Beautiful engine turn dashboard. Here's your speedometer. This is your choke right here. This one here is ammeter or voltmeter. Ammeter actually is what it is. Oil pressure. You've got your, this is how much fuel you have. That's your fuel gauge. This is your water temperature. This is your clock. And of course your cigarette lighter. Look at that. Imagine lighting your cigarette from your car. The age we live in. Your key goes here. You have another door here you can open and close. A horn is in the center. Your headlights are adjusted here, as well as your dash lights. This is your freewheeling here, which allows you to shift without the clutch. You've got your windshield wipers here, one on each side. You can turn them on individually. These are your sunshades. These come down, obviously, to keep the light out of your eyes. It's a pretty cool, well-equipped car for the period. You have interior lights, you have lights in the corner, you have a window shade in the back. And you have a dome light as well as two lights on the side. You have a shade you can pull down, and that window also rolls down. And you got the beautiful window cranks and door handles. As you can see, nicely polished. I don't know what material this is. I guess I don't know, is that stainless steel? I'm not even sure, but it's certainly held its luster all these years. And also nice wood here on the side as well. It's just a well-made automobile. This was not a cheap car back in the day. This is probably $5,000 or $6,000, which doesn't seem like much now, but a house was $1,200. So that'll give you some idea what this thing costs. I think it's time to take this thing for a ride. You know, you think people are status conscious now, Back in the 20s and 30s, people really judged you by the automobile that you drove. I mean, almost more than anything else, because there was nothing else really that you could carry with you that had the prominence and the stature of an automobile. Maybe some jewelry if you were female, or maybe an expensive watch if you were a man. But, you know, pulling up to a nightclub or a restaurant in an impressive automobile like a Duesenberg or a Packard or a Pearsau or a Rolls-Royce, well, that meant you had arrived. By 1932, the car was here to stay. And it wasn't just about practicality anymore. You know, Henry Ford thought nobody would ever need any more of a car than a Model T. It was just to get you from here to there, nothing fancy. But people like luxury, they like status. And by 1932, it was the height of the Depression. So all the manufacturers come out with dream cars. Cadillac with 16 cylinders. Cadillac was the first car to have the engine compartment styled. So when you open the hood, oh my God, there was chrome and copper and stainless steel, and it was just a beautiful looking mechanical thing, you know. It was like the back of a watch. And to combat the 16-cylinder Cadillac, Packard came out with this, their own V12. And it was a magnificent engine, quiet, strong. There aren't many of these engines left. You might pay $50,000 or $60,000 if you could find one today, even one that's not in very good shape. But once you get them running, they're pretty bulletproof. I've had this thing over 30 years. I've never done anything other than change the oil. It's a low revving, powerful, if you consider 160 horsepower powerful, and most people did back in the day. The Duesenberg was the extrovert. That was 265 horsepower and 320 supercharged. The Packard had a quiet elegance. These were popular among bankers and, you know, society people and folks like that, just because they were so extremely well made. I mean, it literally just rolls down the road. It's got so much torque. It shifts beautifully. Let me show you how this shifter works. You see, when you put that in freewheeling, you can take your foot off the gas, not touch the clutch, shift it, touch the gas, and it re-engages again. Let me show you how the freewheeling works. You drive along and you lift your foot off the gas pedal, and notice you don't slow down because the engine has been disconnected from the rear wheels. By that I mean it disengages, the clutch pulls in, and you're just rolling. This does not have hydraulic brakes. This has mechanical brakes with a vacuum in it, which means it's like a power mechanical brake. By mechanical brake, I mean instead of having hydraulic brakes where you have liquid in a tube that applies pressure, you have a steel rod. You press your foot on the brake and the steel rod pulls the brake shoe. Hydraulic brakes are much better because you can get more power, but these actually work quite well because these had the best of both worlds. You had a piece of steel. You know, Henry Ford used to say the safety of steel from pedal to wheel, because he didn't like hydraulic brakes at first. But it really is true. And with the mechanical advance, you could get a lot of pressure by pressing on the pedal, and you wouldn't have to worry about you know, fluid in the tube leaking or breaking or anything like that. So they were pretty bulletproof. In fact, I haven't touched the brakes on this car in 30 years other than just to adjust them. Plus, it's just nice to drive. You know, this is one of the few antique or classic cars you can actually take on the freeway and drive at freeway speeds. I did put high-speed gears in the rear end. This had like 456s or something when I got it. We put like 354s in it, so now you can cruise at 65 or 70 without, you know, just revving the heck out of the engine there. That's the only modification I did, was put the high-speed gears in it. It's got plenty of power. It's really comfortable, and it's an impressive looking automobile. 142-inch wheelbase, probably weighs about close to 5,000 pounds, which is pretty hefty, or as I like to call it, road-hugging weight. But look, we'll take it up to 65 or 70. You know, it's funny, in all the cars we do here, we always put a microphone near the tailpipe so you can hear the sound of the engine, but this one there's hardly any sound at all because it's just meant to be incredibly quiet. It really drives much like a modern car. When I first got this thing, Phil went for a ride with me and sat in the seat, and I tried not to scare him by showing how good a driver I was, and I think he appreciated that. He was really a wonderful guy, very quiet, very soft-spoken. Phil made his acting debut In the John Frankenheimer film Grand Prix, there's a scene where you see Phil yells, "Fire! Fire! The car's on fire!" You know, and that was his acting. I think that was his entire acting career. He was a pretty shy guy, a very modest guy. You know, if you saw a group of men standing and you said, "Which one's the world champion?" If you didn't know, you might not pick Phil. He was so unassuming. But that was a very nice quality. He wasn't a braggart, wasn't a loudmouth. Just a truly decent human being. Very modest and, I don't know, mechanical genius. People throw the word genius around. Not as close as I've seen when it comes to dealing with old cars. He just had an intuitive sense, you know. As a young man, he went to England, I think, to work for Jaguar. He learned to drive those over there. I believe he won the very first Pebble Beach race, if I'm not mistaken. And as I said, I don't think he ever broke a car. Whenever I want to go blast around, I'll take out the Duesenberg and open the cutout on the exhaust, kind of make some noise and drive it pretty fast. Whenever it's Christmas time and my wife and I want to go look at the lights around town, we'll take this thing because it's quiet. You can sneak up on things, and you know, it's kind of fun. I don't think it would be unfair to say that Packard was the equivalent of Rolls-Royce in America. I think pretty close. Certainly technically as good as those cars. Although this car cruises fine at 65, even 70 miles an hour. On a nice road like this, you know, 45 to 50 seems just about right. Extremely smooth ride, lots of torque, engine turning. There's no tachometer, so I don't really know what the engine RPM is, but it's obviously not much. The 20s and 30s were really Packard's heyday, I think that's fair to say. It was the best-selling luxury car in America, if not the world. I mean, Packards are known the world over. You know, back in the day when cars like this were built, they all had extravagant hood ornaments, and this one is no exception. Imagine parking this on the street today. How long do you think that hood ornament would last before somebody ripped it off? Just take the whole cap and run off with it. So that quickly faded out. The only hood ornament left is really the Flying Lady on the Rolls-Royce, but that one was pretty impressive. As I said, I enjoy driving this car because it's comfortable and it's fun and it's so well made. But most of all, because it reminds me of my friend Phil Hill. You know, there's an old saying, you never want to meet your heroes, but that was not the case with Phil. He was truly a hero. And, you know, he grew up and raced in the most dangerous time in racing. It was the deadliest period. When Phil raced, drivers got killed at the rate of one a week or one every 2 weeks, sometimes even more. And he saw a lot of his close friends go up in flames and crash. And he wore those scars. You could tell that had affected him, you know. And whenever people would talk about racing and accidents and things, he would always sort of just quietly, you know, just kind of back out of the conversation. Because he had been there, you know. Kind of like guys that had been to war versus guys that never been to war and tell stories. You know, the guys that had been to war just kind of keep it to themselves. And he was always quiet about that kind of stuff. He was America's first world champion, but most of all, he was a truly decent human being, and he was my friend. And that's why I'd like to dedicate this episode to Phil Hill. Godspeed, my old friend. See you next week.
Mm-hmm.